So Ed, let me go back and I want to get at what are the economic causes. Yep. I think that Jared covered a lot of them, although some of it is what causes the ability for top managers to get higher pay, and so from an economist point of view, I want to get to the causes and also the relative impacts versus the absolute impacts.
Before I do that, which I'll do in 1 second, just pop up slide 16, please, which is the data that he refers to, that he says has flat wages since 1980. Do we have that? This is the slide that was in the New York Times. It shows you the growth in incomes. The United States is the red line. The next line is Germany. The next line is France. So just so people don't have any misunderstanding of data, if you look at the median, which I circled in blue, the United States has grown at the same rate as France and Germany have. At the lower levels, it's pretty much the same rate. All of the growth has come at the high end. It has not been flat by the Luxembourg income study.
Sorry.
If you flip to the next slide.
Let me just say, wait.
This is the data that's in the New York Times.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. And I did
specify. Do you want to debate the data that's on the chart?
He's exactly right. And the reason was I was talking about since 2000. And I should have been specified that. Since 2000.
Flip up the next slide, please.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, here you go. Since 1980 to 2010, part of the reason why the New York Times uses 1980 and not 1990 is because Europe and Japan were catching up to the United States after World War II, and since 1990, the U.S. has really taken off relative to Europe and Japan. And so I put Germany and France here because they were two of the most biggest data points in the graph. You can see that the U.S. has risen substantially relative to Germany and France since 1990. And it's true that all the incomes have been relatively flat since 2000. But Germany, which has had the fastest growth, really has had the flattest wages of all of these. So Jared, I think, does raise some points. I feel that things get conflated between what's driving income at the top and what's causing wage pressure in the middle. At the top, I think there's no doubt that information technology and a combination of that access to global markets has really created a shortage of properly trained talent in the United States. It's driven up wages. If you really dig down and look at the wages at the top, CEO wages have not risen faster than the wages of the 0.01%. If you look at the 0.01%, the wages have broadly distributed grown at very similar rates. And most of those people are guys like partners in law firms who are competing with other partners and other law firms to try to get customers to pay them more. And they're competing out in the marketplace to hire talented people to work for them. And so they are earning their increases in pay. They are not CEOs going to their boards and getting their boards to pay them more at the expense of shareholders. When you look at the pay of CEOs, public company CEO pay has not risen relative to private company CEO, and neither of them, public or private, have risen relative to the rest of the 0.1%. So I think what you really see is opportunity costs, a real opportunity relative to a shortage of labor. And that shortage is especially acute because Europe and Japan have not been able to produce the IT innovation anywhere near the level of IT innovation that the US has. It's the only place in the world you can really go to for leadership in that level of innovation. What's happened in the middle income at the same time? There's been a massive increase in the supply of labor, which has put pressure on the wages, independent of what's going on at the highest end. So there were a number of trends, forces that were increasing pay at the middle. One, there was a dearth of births in the Great Depression. So coming out of World War II, you had a shortage of labor. We saturated the population with education. It greatly increased the productivity. Technology hollowed out agriculture, and we had migration to the cities where people are much more productive. We had a large growth in capital-intensive manufacturing jobs. Today, technology is hollowing out manufacturing, and all of those forces have run their course. What's left in their place is that we had an enormous baby boom, which increased the supply of labor. We had a big increase in the participation of women, which increased the supply of labor. On top of that, we're running about $500 billion a year of non-energy trade deficits, which translates into millions of jobs being exported overseas, probably more than 5 million jobs being exported overseas, and we absorbed an enormous wave of immigration in the United States, largely at the low skill level. Today we have 37 million foreign-born adults. We have 16 million native-born adult children of foreign-born parents. So on a population of a little over 300 million people, we have about 53 million people in the country from this wave of immigration. Don't kid yourself that it hasn't put pressure on middle income wages and unskilled wages in our country. So what is the only force that is driving up wages today relative to the world wage, which is constantly exerting pressure, pulling our unskilled and middle income wages back to the world wage? The only thing is increases in local demand. And that is chiefly today coming from the outsized success of the 1% in the United States relative to the success of Europe and Japan. And that increase in growth can manifest itself in two ways. One is as an increase in wages, and the second is as an increase in employment. And what we have seen over the last 20 years is a massive increase in employment in the United States relative to Europe and Japan. U.S. employment grew 50% since 1980. Europe, Germany and France, less than half as much. Japan, less than a third, almost only a quarter of the growth in the United States, which means our growth has been double France's and Germany's in terms of employment. Today, despite this enormous increase in the supply of labor, we have 20 to 25% more hours of work per working age adult than they have in Germany and France. And we have been able to achieve this at income levels which are about 20 to 25% higher than Europe and Japan's median income levels. And I just would remind you that if it were not for the skewed contribution of US innovation, the growth in Europe and Japan would be even slower relative to the United States than it is today, and it's shockingly slow relative to the United States. So I'd say this: had we restricted the supply of labor, we could have much higher middle income than we have had as a result of the massive increase that we've had. And so I would summarize it in this way. The left has done a brilliant job of blaming the success of the 1% for the slow growth of middle incomes. If that were truly the case, if it was truly the case that income inequality was bad for the middle class, we would not have seen the outsized growth in employment that we saw in the United States relative to Europe and Japan. Quite the opposite. They're more equally distributed incomes. Their economies would have grown faster than ours. Ours grew way faster than theirs. And so I would be careful not to damage the one thing that is producing growth in the United States in this high-wage economy, and that's the outsized success of America's 1% or America's 0.01%, however you want to measure it. And I think that Europe and Japan show us how hard it is in this environment to grow high-wage economies, and how hard it is to motivate an entrepreneurial class in their economies where they have been singularly unsuccessful in being able to duplicate what we've done in the United States. And so I just say those are cautionary tales, and before you blame the success of the 1% and you do damage to that success, you ought to recognize where the real growth has come from and the success we have had in increasing middle and lower income job creation, and we've been able to do that at wages which are significantly higher than Europe and Japan, and we've been able to grow them at the same rate despite this enormous increase in the supply of labor.
So that covered a lot of ground very succinctly, but it did it very well. So Ed, what you're saying, I just want to see if I get it, because actually I asked about economics, about to shift to some things, and some of these issues are social and cultural as well as economic, as to how people are allowed to be paid and who gets to vote on that and things like that. And then there gets to be regulation. So what you're saying, if I could just summarize for a bit, because I'm going to shift over here to some of the social and cultural, is you're saying that the difference between the U.S. and other developed world economies competing in this global marketplace.
At this point in time, yes.
At this point in time, is that the one differentiator of the U.S. is the degree of success of the innovative part of the economy, which has driven a lot of the success of the very high-end wage earners, has actually been a force that has helped lift the middle of the economy more so than the economies that are similar to ours but don't have that magnitude of success. Is that? Absolutely.
And I don't see how you can see it any other way, because I see a lot of comparisons to the 1950s when circumstances were very different, comparisons to the 1990s when the NASDAQ went from 800 to 4,500, and say, why can't we produce growth equal to the 1990s? Why haven't we been able to produce growth equal to the 1950s? Because the circumstances are completely different. You have to make comparisons to other high-wage economies at this point in time to see the real relative success of the U.S. and to be able to understand it.
So you're saying economically, and that's what I want you to give, economically, the extraordinary success of the 1% is a net positive for the rest of the members.
Absolutely.
Economically in the society.
And I will show you other data later as we get here on mobility, which if it was a problem for the middle class, we'd see mobility slowing down. We have seen no reduction in mobility. And when you make comparisons to pop-up slide 18, for example, when you make comparisons to the U.S. versus Denmark, Denmark is one of the most equally distributed incomes in the whole world, but certainly in Europe. And what this is showing you is the probability if you're in the bottom fifth that you can get from the bottom fifth, you remain in the bottom fifth, you get from the bottom fifth to the top fifth, or if on the other end of the spectrum, if you're in the top fifth, what's the probability you end up in the bottom fifth or you end up in the top fifth? What you see is that US mobility is almost identical to Denmark, except at the bottom 20%. And at the bottom 20%.
Let's pause there. We're going to come back to it because we're going to have a discussion of mobility. One sentence, that's it.
One sentence. You see lower test scores, higher dropout rates, disintegration of two-parent families, higher crime rates. You can blame those things on economics, and perhaps it is economics which is causing those things, but you at least ought to open your mind to the fact that there might be other reasons for the kinds of problems that we're seeing in the bottom 20% of the income distribution of the United States and the effect that it's having on social mobility.
That's good.